I need you to see this. This country, Burkina Faso, in 2023 pulls around 57 tons of gold out of the ground. At today's market value, that gold is worth more than $5 billion, enough to lay hundreds of kilometers of track, enough to rebuild the crumbling railway line that still carries passengers into the capital today. But almost none of that wealth ever stayed. For almost 100 years, the gold keeps flowing out. Foreign companies dig it up, they ship it out to Switzerland, to South Africa to be refined. Then it's sold here in Dubai and here in London. And meanwhile, when Burkina Faso needs to build a road, a railway, or a power plant, it doesn't finance it with its own gold wealth. It borrows instead from the World Bank, from international monetary funds. Gold out, debt in. For nearly a century, that has been the circle. Then in 2022, a 34-year-old army captain seizes power and openly challenges a system that few before him had dared to confront. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, and over the next 3 years, his government begins attempting something most resource-rich African states have talked about for decades, but rarely done. The state moves to reclaim mining assets. It begins rebuilding a national gold refinery, creates a state-owned gold company, and launches a sovereign fund with one goal. And that goal is to use gold to finance infrastructures, railways, roads, and power, instead of borrowing for it. This is a story of how Burkina Faso, battling an active insurgency and operating with just one aging railway line, decide to try funding its future with the wealth beneath its soil, and whether the gambling is paying off. Let's dive in. A country sitting on billions of dollars of gold just decided to stop selling it the old way and use it to build its own future instead. Here's what's happening and why that matters. Okay, so in 2023, this country, Burkina Faso in West Africa, pulled around 57 tons of gold out of the ground. At today's prices, that's worth more than $5 billion. That's enough to lay hundreds of kilometers of brand new railway, enough to rebuild the old rusting colonial-era train line that still runs through the middle of the capital. And there is a reason the gold is here. Burkina Faso sits on an ancient band of rock called the Berimian Belt, running under all West Africa, packed with some of the most gold-rich ground on earth. It's why by 2023, Burkina Faso was Africa's fourth largest gold producer. Gold makes up around 80% of everything the country sells abroad, which makes one fact difficult to explain. Despite its resources, much of the country has seen little of the prosperity they promised. But there's something that doesn't quite add up. If Burkina Faso has been producing gold at this scale for years, why hasn't that translated into more development at home? Here's why. These mines, for much of the modern mining era, Burkina Faso own little of them. The biggest ones are run by foreign companies, Canadian, Australian, Russian, some with French money sitting quietly behind them. And the gold doesn't stay in Burkina Faso, it flies out, up here to Switzerland and down here to South Africa, because that's where it gets refined. Burkina Faso can't even do that part at home. It has no refinery of its own, then it gets sold here in Dubai and here in London. So when you step back and look at the whole system, the pattern becomes obvious. The country exports raw gold, then spends its money buying finished products back. And when it needed to build, it didn't reach for the gold, it borrowed. From the World Bank, the global development lender, and from the international monetary funds. The Washington-based institution that hands struggling economies emergency cash in exchange for a say in how they tax and spend. You can read the whole story in the country's railway. Burkina Faso has essentially one line, a single track built under French colonial rule, running south from the capital, Ouagadougou, to the port of Abidjan on the coast of Côte d'Ivoire. For a landlocked country with no coastline of its own, that line is the lifeline to the sea. By the 2020s, much of it was worn out. Gold flying out, debt flowing in, one worn-out line to the sea. That was the system, and it held for 100 years until 2022, when a 34-year-old army captain seized power, looked at all of it and decided the gold was going to stay. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, and the first thing he came for was the mines. On the 30th of September 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré took power in Burkina Faso's second coup in a single year. He was 34 years old. He cast the takeover as a second independence, and his economic plan started on the ground. The first move was a new mining code brought in 2024. It rewrote the rules in the state's favor, bigger government stakes in new projects, and a requirement to use local companies and local suppliers wherever possible. The message to the foreign miners was blunt. The times had changed. The second move was institutional. In 2023, the government created SOPAMIB, a new state-owned mining company designed to hold stakes in gold mines on behalf of Burkina Faso. And then it got to work, buying assets where it could, taking control where it believed it had to. In August 2024, the state took over two mines, Bongo and Wanyon, formerly run by the Canadian company Endeavour Mining. It paid about $80 million, a fraction of roughly $300 million the asset had been valued at. By June 2025, the process was complete. 5 gold mining assets pulled from foreign hands and handed to SOPAMIB. By the end of that year, 6 of Burkina Faso's 15 industrial gold mines were majority Burkinabe owned. 3 of them were controlled directly by the state. For a sector that just a few years earlier had almost no local ownership at all, that's a hard turn. Traoré also went after the part everyone else had skipped, refining. In November 2023, he laid the foundation stone for the country's first national gold refinery, built with a local firm, Marina Gold, and designed to process up to 150 tons of gold a year. His reasoning was simple. If the country could dig the gold out of the ground, why couldn't it also weigh it, test it, refine it, and sell it itself? Why let the most valuable steps happen somewhere else? On top of that, the government did something Burkina Faso had never done in its history. It began building national gold reserves, keeping a share of metal as a state asset rather than selling every gram. The result showed up in the account fast. The state's direct income from mining rose from around $930 million in 2023 to $1.34 billion by the end of 2025. And in December 2025, the government used that rising revenue to pay about $2.1 billion of domestic debt, close to a quarter of what it owed at home. More gold revenue, less debt. The question was what to do with the difference. This is where the gold is supposed to meet the steel. Remember the old colonial railway that runs to the coast? Restoring it is now one of Burkina Faso's key priorities. In 2026, the country is beginning a first phase of railway construction and rehabilitation worth about $53 million. The main focus is the Abidjan-Kaya Railway, which connects Burkina Faso to the port of Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. The complete rehabilitation of the line is expected to cost around $1.4 billion. But the most revealing part isn't the track, it's a factory. Alongside the railway project, the government had announced plans to build rails and train wagons inside Burkina Faso through a local company. The goal is to reduce reliance on imports and produce more of the materials needed for the country's rail network at home. It's the same idea behind National Gold Refinery, keep more of the value inside Burkina Faso instead of sending it abroad. But the bigger goal goes beyond a single railway. Burkina Faso is a landlocked country, which means access to the sea is critical. Relying on one road to one port creates a major vulnerability. To reduce that risk, Burkina Faso and Ghana signed a railway cooperation agreement in 2025 to develop a corridor linking the port of Tema on Ghana's coast to Ouagadougou, a route of roughly 950 kilometers. Part of that network is already in place. The 97-kilometer Tema-Nkpakadan railway in Ghana was completed in late 2024. If the wider project moves forward, Burkina Faso would gain a second major route to the sea, reducing its dependence on a single trade corridor. The railways are only part of the story. The government has also launched large infrastructure programs that, according to the official figures, have roughly doubled the country's paved road network. The construction is real, but there is an important detail that often gets lost in the online narrative. Most of Burkina Faso's current rail projects are still being financed by international donors and development banks, not directly by gold revenues. Funding for the Abidjan-Kaya Railway rehabilitation came through agreements with external partners. In 2025, the World Bank approved $216 million road and rail project, while the African Development Bank provided a €70 million transport loan later that year. So the gold is not paying for today's railway tracks, at least not yet. What the gold is doing is something less visible, but potentially more important. The government is using it to build new institutions and financial structures designed to keep larger share of the country's mineral wealth inside Burkina Faso and give the state more control over how that wealth is used. If you want to fund infrastructure without borrowing, you need somewhere to put the money. Burkina Faso has just built it. Then came the mechanism designed to turn gold into long-term investment. In 2026, Burkina Faso's Council of Ministers approved the creation of a sovereign wealth fund known as Siniyan-Sigui. The idea is straightforward. When global gold prices rise above a benchmark set by the government, the extra revenue is not meant to disappear into day-to-day government spending. Instead, that windfall is transferred into the fund and set aside for future infrastructure and industrial projects. In other words, the goal is to convert temporary commodity booms into long-term national assets. The fund is expected to begin deploying its first investment in 2027. If it works as intended, future railway factories, power projects, and other major infrastructure could be financed not just by foreign lenders, but increasingly by wealth generated from Burkina Faso's own natural resources. That's the engine meant to eventually pay for rails and power without a loan attached. The second piece is regional. Burkina Faso isn't doing this alone. In 2023, it joined Mali and Niger, two neighbors also run by military governments after their own coup, to form the Alliance of Sahel States. In 2024, the three turned into a formal confederation, and they walked out of ECOWAS, the West African regional bloc. They are accused of serving outside interests. The strategy doesn't stop with Sovereign Wealth Fund. In December 2025, the Alliance of Sahel States launched the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development based in Niamey, Niger, with initial capital of about $820 million. Its mission is to finance major projects, roads, railway, energy systems, and other infrastructure across the three member states using regional capital rather than relying entirely on foreign lenders. At the same time, Burkina Faso has been reshaping its international partners as relations with Western countries cooled and French forces departed. The government moved closer to Russia, expanding the security cooperation and granting mining licenses to Russian companies, including Norgold. Viewed together, these moves reveal a broader strategy. First, increase state control over mines, then refine more gold inside the country. Save part of the revenue in sovereign wealth fund, create a regional bank to finance development projects, build more industrial capacity at home, including materials and equipment needed for railways. The goal is to move away from old model, where raw materials were exported and development depended heavily on foreign loans. Whether that vision succeeds remains an open question. Some parts are already operating, others are still in the planning stage. The real test will be whether these institutions can generate enough investment, revenue, and industrial growth to turn the blueprint into reality. A country that spent a century shipping its gold out and borrowing the proceeds back has, in 3 years, taken control of its mining, started building a national refinery, begun stockpiling a reserve, paid down billions in debt, and stood up both a sovereign fund and regional bank aimed squarely at one goal: financing its future. If you love infrastructure projects like this, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section what you think about this project happening and all of the things happening in Burkina Faso. See you on the next one.